Creel Price is a... hold your applauses. I'm just going to give a quick introduction. Thank you. He's a serial entrepreneur and he's a social entrepreneur. Okay, he's been working on many different projects. He's launched 8 startups before he left school, and he's done many different things. At the age of 25, he launched Blueprint Management Group with $5,000 in capital, and 10 years later, sold it for over 100 million. Okay, so he knows what he's talking about. So we've got a really good speaker here to share some knowledge with us. So without further ado, please make welcome Creel Price.
When I heard about it, I couldn't believe it was actually happening in Sydney, so I put my hand up and said I'd love to be involved. And then Trevor said, well, would you mind doing the opening address? Your job will be to inspire everyone. So I think I've actually got the easiest job in the next 48 hours, because the fact that you're here at 7 o'clock on a Friday night instead of at the pub, I figured you're probably pretty inspired already. But so I guess I'll share a little bit about my own personal journey. But one of the things that I want to start with is really, you guys are standing on the precipice of a massive change that's going on in the world, where we are starting to combine business with social good. And social enterprise is really where that all starts. So I've never seen it happen over the course of 48 hours, but I'm excited to actually hear what the results are going to be. So I think it's going to be a pretty interesting journey that you're all going to go through. Some of you are obviously in business already. Some of you maybe have never started business. Who's never been in business before? Had their own business? A few of you guys. Well, I think there's nothing more exciting than actually the first time you actually get into business. So you guys are going to be in for a pretty exciting ride as well. Well, my first business started at the ripe old age of 11. I found myself the strawberry baron of Western New South Wales. I grew up in Cowra on a little farm. And at the age of 11, I started my own strawberry business, and it all started with a goal. I wanted to buy my own computer, but it wasn't any old computer. It was one of these little fandangled machines called a Commodore 64. Anyone have a Commodore 64? Maybe you guys are a bit young for this, but it was a pretty amazing bit of machinery. It had 64,000 kilobytes of memory. I think the average mobile phone has about 10,000 times that. That's how much things have changed since I was a kid. But even so, it enabled us to play some pretty cool things. We could play Ghostbusters and do real life moves like Bruce Lee and that sort of stuff. After we'd waited the 3/4 of an hour for it to load up on our tape deck. And most people in the audience look like Gen Ys. You're probably going, "What's a tape deck?" Well, it's one of those. So these days things are a little bit easier. But anyway, in order for me to be able to afford to buy a computer, I realised that because the family farm was going through a pretty severe drought at the time, it was going to be pretty much up to me. So I hatched this plan with my younger brother that we would send away for 500 strawberry plants, and we'd plant them and sell them beside the highway. And so we sent away for them, and sure enough, these strawberries turned into these most luscious, beautiful, sweet strawberries you could ever imagine. And an 11-year-old and 9-year-old sitting beside the highway, you can imagine they sold out like hotcakes. So not only did I get to buy my Commodore 64, but I got a new set of golf clubs and a record player, where I got to play my very first LPs, which were, it says a bit about my music taste, I think, was Meatloaf's Bat Out of Hell and Kenny Rogers' Greatest Hits, which I think a lot of those would go straight over your head. But with that early taste at entrepreneurial success, the following year I decided to increase production, and I sent away for 3,000 strawberry plants. And I did a deal with my school bus driver. We used to take an hour and a half each morning and each afternoon to get to school. But I did a deal with the bus driver that I hooked up all the fruit shops around town. If I had the strawberries picked and packed by 7:30 in the morning when the bus picked me up, in return for strawberries, my bus driver would deliver them to all of the shops around town, right? And that seemed to work pretty well, and the money just kept pouring in. And with the family farm still going through a pretty severe drought, the following year I decided to increase production again, and we'd put 4,000 strawberry plants in, and it became an all-encompassing family affair. In fact, I think I was the only 13-year-old in my class that could boast that he was employing his parents. As you can imagine, dinner time at the Price household was a constant power struggle. My mum would be like, "Creel Price, if you don't eat your greens, you're not getting any sweets." And I'd be going, "Well, if I don't get any sweets, you can consider yourself fired." Fortunately, God had a sense of humour, I think, and the next year my whole strawberry patch caught a pretty rampant fungal disease, and that was pretty much the end of that. But such is the optimism of youth, and I'm seeing it here tonight, is I had another 7 businesses, as Trevor mentioned, before I left school, and another 2 at university. And I guess I've had the business bug ever since. I did manage to work for a few years in finance. I think it was 2.5 years, until I saved up enough money to put on my backpack, and I travelled around the world for 12 months, as some of you probably have, and maybe even some of you are still doing. But it was a pretty amazing time. And then I found myself in Africa. And Africa's a pretty amazing place. And I was climbing Mount Kilimanjaro in Africa, and I was finding it pretty tough. And one of my fellow climbing buddies, it was an English chap, and he handed me this business biography of an English entrepreneur I'd never come across before. It was entitled "Losing My Virginity." Anyone ever read Sir Richard Branson's "Losing My Virginity"? Yeah, so I was getting pretty inspired reading his tales of entrepreneurial endeavour, how he'd started his business at 15 and gone on to found the Virgin Empire. And I thought, if Branson could do it, so can I. Which I think I could probably only have come up with climbing a high altitude mountain, because you get this thing called mountain altitude sickness, which doesn't allow you to think very clearly. But anyway, I set myself the goal, if I could get to the top of Mount Kilimanjaro, I was going to be a millionaire before I was 30, and I'd set up my own business. So that was my goal, and I managed to get to the top of Mount Kilimanjaro, which was pretty hard, but as it turned out, it was probably one of the easiest part of the equation, because I came back to Australia and I joined forces with a chap by the name of Trevor Folsom, and we threw $5,000 in each, and we founded Blueprint Management Group with more hope than promise. We didn't even know what business we were going to be in, other than the fact that we wanted to create the next Virgin Empire, and we wanted to find the formula really of how to be successful at business. So to cut a very, very long story very, very short, I did manage to build the company up from the age of 25. By the time I was 30, it was doing pretty well, and I was I suppose I could say on paper at least I was a millionaire. But it was another 5 years or so later, we'd built the company up, and my passion, I realised, was I love business, but more than that, I really love business that makes a difference. So I decided with Trevor that we were going to sell the business so I could concentrate on these endeavours. So sure enough, we managed to sell the business, as Trevor mentioned, for I think it was $109 million. It managed to do it 3 days before Bear Stearns crumbled, which, if any of you are familiar with the writings of the global financial crisis, that was pretty much the start of when things really started to go bad. So we were pretty lucky in that regard. And I guess since retiring from business, what I've been involved in is a lot of social enterprise, and it revolves around this concept I have called the entrepreneurship, which is really a 21st century renaissance inspired by entrepreneurial thinking. And it's all about reviving these 6 things, which is change and meaning and fulfillment and freedom, community and legacy. And without going into those in any detail, for me, it's social enterprise is the thing that actually combines all 6 of those in the best way. And so I thought I'd share with you now a little bit about social enterprise and why I'm involved and what it's all about. So for me, the future of business is this concept of social enterprise, where we're combining commerce with charity. Okay. And I think if we can really start to harness the entrepreneurial spirit, not only in Australia but around the world, and particularly in third world countries, we are going to really make a massive difference. So the endeavours that I've been involved in since business, I guess one of the first initiatives was I was contracted by the government, actually, in partnership with the Kokoda Track Foundation to set up microfinance and micro businesses along the Kokoda Track. There's 4,000 Aussies every year trek the Kokoda Track, but they're so head down, backpack on, just getting through the walk, they don't actually engage with the locals, which is a pretty sad thing. So we were engaged with the government to try and create businesses along the track, which which sounds like a pretty amazing initiative, but it's probably harder than you think, because not only they didn't speak English, most of them didn't actually speak Pidgin that our interpreter spoke. So we had to translate it into Pidgin and then have someone else to translate it into each of the local dialects, which were different along the track. So that was a pretty interesting initiative. The next thing that I'm pretty passionate about is not only getting the third world into business, but to get kids into business. Because I think if you can turn on that spark at a really young age, as it did for me, you can really make a massive difference. So I founded a thing about 3 years ago called the Club Kidpreneur Foundation, and we inspire 8 to 12-year-olds to do business. And we've got a program which we run in after school care, and we run a camp now as well. We've worked with over 45 schools and over 1,000 kids, and I think we've had 12 market days. But it's such an inspiring thing to be around, because we have about 50 odd volunteer mentors. Anyone wants to be involved in this, we'd love to have you. But what's actually happened is the kids are actually teaching the mentors about business, which is quite an interesting thing that we didn't actually think about. Because sometimes if you really simplify business down into its simplest form, you're going to be more successful, right? And I think that's probably a lesson that you need to start to think about with your own social enterprises here tonight, is how do you make things simple as possible, okay? We had one little kid came through the program, and I think he was only 8 years of age, and he decided he wanted to sell paper aeroplanes at our market. And Seb, one of our mentors that was doing that particular program, said, "Oh, mate, I'm not sure that paper aeroplanes are such a good idea, because it's mostly adults at this market, so there's really going to be no one want to buy paper aeroplanes. Maybe you should come up with something else." And the kid said, "No, mate," he said, I'm committed, I'm going to build paper airplanes. And one of the things we encourage the mentors to do is allow the kids to fail if that's what happens, because that, in some ways, some businesses are successful, some aren't. So he goes, good luck with that, kid. So the kid turns up to market day with these 30 beautifully manicured paper planes that he's coloured up and everything, and Seb's shaking his head thinking, this is going to end in disaster. But sure enough, the kid sells, the first half an hour, the kid sells 20 paper airplanes. He's selling them for $1 each, or 3 for $3. And he's doing pretty well. So Seb thought, maybe I should help this kid out with a bit of business advice. So he said, "Kid, maybe you should put your prices up, because it's another 2 hours at the markets and you only got 10 planes." And the kid said, "No, mate." He said, "I got a different idea." He's obviously an entrepreneurial kid, this one. So he came up with this idea where instead of selling his planes, he decided to lease them instead. And he came up with this game where he drew a big target and he charged people $1 a go, that if they hit the target, they got to keep the plane. But of course, no one did. And he stretched his planes all the rest of the market. But some pretty cool stuff happens in the program. In fact, we've just done a program not too far from here in Everleigh with some Aboriginal kids. And it's quite amazing when you speak to some kids that maybe aren't academically talented, maybe they're not talented in sport or music or arts. Business can be one of those things they're absolutely talented at. If you can turn on it at a young enough age, you can really make a difference. One of the kids in that program, he'd tried to commit suicide 3 times within the last 12 months, and he was diagnosed with depression, and he didn't go to school that much. But after doing the program, we got an email from his mum to say that he was an absolutely different kid after this program, that he could go to school, and not only could go to school, he could stand up in front of the class with confidence and start to speak again. And he's kept his little business going. He's got a little hot dog business, and he's kept it going, and it's just an amazing thing for a little kid like that didn't think he had a lot of hope, that all of a sudden business has created that hope for him. But one of the other enterprises I've been involved in is One Water, which some of you may have heard of before. One Water, essentially we sell a bottle of water, and 100% of our profits go to fund one of these things, a play pump. Essentially, a play pump works, we put them in schoolyards in Africa, and as the kids play around on the merry-go-round, the water gets pumped out of the ground into a holding tank. So instead of the kids having to spend 6 hours a day collecting water, they get to go and get an education. And so since being involved in that organisation, it was actually founded by Paul Robinson, the very same guy who handed me Richard Branson's biography all those years ago. And he asked me if I'd help bring it to Australia, which we did. But we've raised over $5 million now for play pumps, and we put 1,000 of these in schoolyards in Africa. So I think there's close to nearly 1 million people affected through this initiative alone. And that's a social enterprise. We're a business, but 100% of our profits do good. Well, where this story ends, I guess, is Richard Branson was at a dinner or a luncheon in New York, and he ran into one of our directors, and he was getting pretty inspired by this concept of social enterprise. So he said, "Wouldn't it be great to to get some of the social entrepreneurs from around the world to together on my island to discuss the future of philanthropy. And Duncan Goose, the CEO of One Water at the time in the UK, was invited. Unfortunately for Duncan, he was having a baby that week. So instead of Duncan as the chairman in Australia, I was the one that actually managed to get to go. So I headed over to Necker Island in the Caribbean to meet the hero that inspired me to get into business. And we spent 5 days with 20 other social entrepreneurs from around the world, and it was just such an amazing time. But to spend that time with Richard, when I thought, he was probably going to blow in an hour a day or something rather, but we were doing Pilates at 6 o'clock in the morning with him and still drinking at the bar at midnight, and it was such an amazing thing. But I, of course, was in his ear the whole time about training entrepreneurs and that sort of stuff, and he'd shared with me that he'd started a foundation in South Africa called the Branson Centre for Entrepreneurship, where they really needed some more help to take it to the next level. So he asked if I'd help out. So I sort of said, you've twisted my arm. So 18 months ago, I was over in Africa 4 times, and now I'm proud to say that the curriculum for the Branson Centre for Entrepreneurship is actually run by my curriculum, where I train entrepreneurs here in Australia. There's a little photo of some of the entrepreneurs. 18 months ago, I ran a 5-day boot camp at a little game park up in north of Johannesburg, because one of the issues that we have in training these 18 to 25-year-old youths that mostly come out of townships, they haven't really had a proper education. So trying to teach entrepreneurship in the classroom is a real uphill battle. So we've devised this program where they actually learn it very experientially. So when they're learning about business models, we give them the metaphor of, it's just like creating your own recipe when you're cooking, So you could grab your grandmother's recipe, which is like the franchise, which you can follow and you'll cook a nice dish, or you could come up with your own recipe with just experimenting, a little bit of this, a little bit of that, until you come up with, and then you can start to leverage yourself, get other people to use that same recipe. So to drive that point home, we had a master chef competition in these little open fires in this game park, and we did orienteering and painting, and one of the last activities we did was climbing a mountain. My philosophy of business is that business is very similar to climbing a high altitude mountain, that you really need to get the vision or your goal of what you want to achieve, and you just can't stop until you actually get there. Well, to drive that point home, there was a little mountain not too far from the game park, so I took the brave move of taking these 20 entrepreneurs up this mountain. But halfway up, I was starting to get a bit nervous. It was starting to look a bit dangerous, and I could just see newspapers from all around the world with Richard Branson's name on it that he'd killed all these entrepreneurs. So I said to the guys, well, you stay here and I'll go and see if the coast is clear. So I ran up the top of this mountain, and it wasn't too bad, but on the way down, because I was rushing, I slipped in what was called a baboon slide and fell about 25 metres and completely shattered my ankle. And which wasn't good when you're in the middle of a training course, of course. So I called all the entrepreneurs together and managed to convince them to go up to the top and come down very safely, with a message of the hardest thing they'll ever do in business is the succession, which is pretty true of mountaineering. Most accidents happen on the way down as well, but that gave me enough time to recover. And by the time they came down a few hours later, I was back in consciousness, and they split themselves into 3 teams, and one team managed to get me down the mountain. The other team was charged with the job of getting me across this about 50-metre wide river. And by this stage, the other team had built a stretcher and carried me the 7 kilometres back to safety. But it ended up being a business lesson that I'll never forget, and I'm sure they haven't forgotten it either. Well, this little exploit managed to get me in Richard's latest book, which is something I'd encourage all of you to read. If losing my virginity was what inspired me to get into business, I think Screw Business as Usual is really a tomb of, there's one there, of social entrepreneurship. He talks about lots of different initiatives around the world that are pretty inspiring. In fact, I'm pleased to say he's chatted a bit about some of the initiatives I've been involved in. I'm going to give Trevor a couple of copies of my book. It's actually launched this week, The One Thing to Win at the Game of Business. So, Trevor, when someone does something amazing this weekend, there's 2 copies for you to give away as you see fit. But where I want to finish this presentation is, I guess, where it all started in climbing a mountain for me. This was a little quote we had on our wall in Blueprint My Business to help remind us that of the job that we had ahead of us. And it goes like this: that the more obstacles conquered, the more inspiring the view. Strive for greatness. Well, Trevor asked me to share my 3 things to keep you inspired over the course of this weekend, and I think for me, it's really the learnings out of that quote, which are firstly that we need to enjoy the challenge. Okay, you are going to come across challenges, and you need to make sure that you smile in the face of adversity, because that's what business is all about. Okay, if it was easy, someone would have already got there before you. The next point is that you need to celebrate your success. Okay, you need to, at each of those milestones on this weekend, or even in the greater journey in making that business a reality, is you need to make sure that it's not all about going forward. You need to look back and appreciate the view. And that's something that I think a lot of business people can learn from as well. And lastly, the top tip to keep you inspired is, I think you do need to aim for something extraordinary. If it's ordinary, you're not going to be able to keep it going when you're starting to lose motivation. But if it is something that is truly going to make a massive impact on the planet, that's the purpose that's going to keep you inspired. So hopefully some of those things ring true for each of you, and I really wish you all the best with the weekend.